in these words. If you doubt the power of natural selection, I urge you to save your soul to read Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker. I think you will find it a revelation. Dawkins gives a nice argument to show how far the process of evolution can go in the time available to it. He points out that man, by selection, has produced an enormous variety of types of dog, such as Pekingese, bulldogs, and so on, the space of only a few thousand years. In the space of only a few thousand years. Here, man is the important factor in the environment, and it is a peculiar, and in his peculiar taste that have produced by selective breeding, not by design, the freaks of nature. We are preserved all, we are preserved, we see preserved all around us as domestic dog. Yet the time required to do this on an evolutionary scale of hundreds of millions of years is extraordinarily short. So we should not be surprised at the ever greater variety of creatures that natural selection has produced on this much larger time scale. Was Crick aware that domestic animal breeding requires a pre-existing purposeful intelligence? He seems to have sensed it on one level, and then wished the ugly fact away by a verbal antithesis: selective breeding, not design. Once again, we see the truth of Feynman's warning. The easiest person to fool is yourself. Only a powerful unconscious need to overlook the truth could have allowed Crick to conceal from himself that animal breeders are intelligent agents, not blind natural forces. Breeders use expert skills to select just the variants they want, and they carefully protect their over-specialized breeds from the natural selection that would otherwise prevent such freaks from surviving to reproduce their own kind. Selective breeding is not the same thing as natural selection, or even analogous to it. Analogous. I guess that depends on what part of the world you live in. It is intelligent design. Critical thinking is good for religion too. Every scientific materialist who reads this will understandably want to ask, are you willing to apply baloney detecting to religion as well as science? The answer is emphatically yes. I can't think of a better way to introduce students to Christianity than to invite them to read the Gospels with care and to ask all the tough questions. I'm also not particularly worried about how they answer those questions the first time through. Dealing with the tough questions is a lifelong business, and the most important educational point is not to try to spoon-feed students with oversimplified answers that won't stand the test of time and experience. Here are two examples of the kinds of issues I'd like young people to begin to think about. Number 6, the problem of suffering. One of the seeming advantages of Darwinism is that it makes it unnecessary to ask why God permits the innocent to suffer and sometimes the wicked to prosper. In a materialistic universe, moral arbitrariness is only to be expected. As Richard Dawkins put it, nature is not interested one way or the other in suffering unless it affects the survival of DNA. Some religious people act like Darwinism some religious people actually like Darwinism because they think it gets God off the hook. If, for some reason, the divine plan involved creating by means of scientific law, some religious people actually like Darwinism because they think it gets God off the hook. If, for some reason, the divine plan involved creating by means of scientific laws, then God couldn't intervene to prevent suffering without spoiling his own grand design. I don't find that convincing, but it's clear that some Darwinists believe in their theory less because of the scientific evidence less because of scientific evidence than because they have theological and philosophical objections to supernatural creation. Of all the errors of scientific materialism, the silliest, that is that resolution of Natural Academy of Science and religion. Let me read that over. Forgive me. I need my glasses desperately. Of all the errors of scientific materialism, the silliest is that resolution of the National Academy of Sciences that religion and science are separate realms that should never be considered in the same context. On the contrary, evolutionary scientists are obsessed with the God question, and the problem of suffering is one important aspect of that question. I would tell students that none of the usual answers to the problem of suffering is entirely satisfactory. I'd want my students to have some familiarity with the classic treatments of the problem, especially the Book of Job and the Grand Inquisitor section of Fyodor Dostoevsky. His book, The Brothers Karamazov, as well as a good Christian apologetics like C.S. Lewis's The Problem of Pain. All right. Okay. I'd want them to read the Psalms and the Gospels with the problem fully in mind and think about whether and how the suffering and resurrection of Jesus help with it. I want them to understand that some of the appeal of Darwinism stems from classic philosophical objections to the doctrine that the world is governed by a creator who loves us and cares about what we do. Above all, I'd want them to face the fact that if science has its unsolved problems, so does religion. We all see through a glass darkly, but what glass should we try to see through? Number 7, the problem of faith. One of the illusions of scientific materialism is its insistence that materialists don't have faith. Comments. Faith is not something some people have and others don't. Faith also isn't something opposed to reason. Faith is something that everybody needs to get started in any direction, and to keep going in the face of discouragement. Reason builds a foundation of faith. For example, scientific materialists have faith that they will eventually find a materialistic theory to explain the origin of life, even though the experimental evidence may be pretty discouraging for now. Because they have faith in their theory, Darwinists believe that common ancestors for the animal phyla once lived on the earth, even though those ancestors can't be found. Niles Eldredge calls himself a knee-jerk neo-Darwinist. In spite of the invertebrate fossil record, because he's convinced on philosophical grounds that the theory must be true. That's every bit as much of a faith commitment as the belief of a young earth creationist that all radiometric dating must be wrong because it contradicts the literal words of Genesis, and because it is a lot easier to deal with the problem of suffering if pain and death first entered the world after human beings had sinned. Given that every position has its difficulties, where should we put our faith? To use the words that Jesus taught us, what is the foundation of a solid rock? And what is the foundation of sand? Praise God. Okay, let me reread that. Given that every position has its difficulties, where should we put our faith? To use the words that Jesus taught us, what is the foundation of solid rock? And what is the foundation of sand? The Christian says that the rock is God, and we should trust in the goodness of God, all the more when the presence of evil and suffering inclines us to doubt. The materialist says that the rock is matter, and that we should never move from its unshakable faith in science and materialism, even when we begin to be discouraged by the difficulties of explaining all the things that do exist without allowing a role to a creator. Beginning a new century and a new millennium. Whatever their faith commitments, good thinkers ought to be dissatisfied about the way things stand at the present time. The evidence that can survive baloney detecting isn't likely to satisfy either materialist or creationist. It seems for now as if new forms appeared mysteriously and by no known mechanism at various widely separated times in the earth's history. Maybe we'll be stuck with the mystery like that indefinitely, but I think it more likely that the 21st century will see a scientific revolution that will completely change our understanding of the history of life. If I'm right about that, the chance to participate in discovering that new understanding should be a thrilling prospect for young people looking forward to a career in science. What makes science so boring is the impression the books give that the important things have already been discovered and all there is left to do is fill in the details. Showing young people that there is a lot we don't know and that we may even be dead wrong about some of the things we think we do know is the way to fire their imaginations. I don't know what new theories the future may bring, but I think I know where the revolution will start. It will start with the realization that life is not the product of mindless natural forces. Life is designed. The end of chapter 4.